Okay, here's the note card I will be using. And then my audience will be my mother, who will also do the camera. Okay. There are many ways to modify a vehicle, but before you do, you have to have an end goal in mind. The key thing to remember is an engine is a giant air pump. Increase the airflow in and out of it, increase the power that the air pump makes. There's a lot of brands out there to get aftermarket parts for, but you really have to do your research and make sure it's quality stuff. If you put something cheap on your car and it breaks, can potentially destroy your motor. So I'm gonna go over 4 of the key subjects when it comes to modifying a car, which are tuning, which is the most important out of all of them, and then increasing airflow through intake, exhaust, um, swapping out and changing internals or getting a stage block for big power, and cooling everything down because the more power you make, the hotter everything runs. So for the first, the most important thing is tuning. When you put aftermarket parts on a vehicle, you have to tune for it. Cars are set up for a certain aspect on everything, and if you don't tune for it, the car won't run right, and you can potentially destroy your motor. So you have to do the research and find a tuner that is close to you that does tunes for your car, and they're also a very helpful way to figure out the direction that you need to go for what you're trying to accomplish. Once you have the tuner taken care of and in place, then the next the next thing is increasing the airflow, which that can be done in with 3 basic things of the car. So the intake side, the exhaust side, and the fuel system. So the intake side, you look for Kohler intakes, aftermarket intake manifolds, or port and polishing of them, because that creates a smoother surface, bigger bores, allows more air. And that also allows for colder air, which colder air is more dense, makes more power. On the exhaust side, it's the same thing with the headers. The up pipe and the rest of the exhaust system allows for more airflow, which creates more power, which also allows more air for the turbo, faster spool, and which is kind of the powerhouse of what gives you extra power. And then your fuel. More air, you need more fuel. Cars have to keep a certain air fuel ratio in order to run properly, which is also where the tune comes in. But you have to add more fuel, the more air you add to keep everything running smoothly. Once you get the bolt-ons and the airflow going, if you still want to make more power, bigger power, is when you're going to have to start looking into getting stage blocks or doing the work yourself and getting upgraded internal parts. Stock engines can only handle so much power, so if you want to go beyond that limit, you have to reinforce the inside of it by getting like forged pistons and parts like that to be able to handle the excess power without damaging the engine. The heads also, you would have to upgrade, be able to handle higher RPM, allow better airflow. Cams are important when it comes to the heads. More aggressive cams allow higher lift on the valves, which allows more air in and out of the motor. So it creates a huge bump in horsepower. Once you've gotten to that point, one part you cannot forget is you have to cool everything. When you're making an extreme amount of power, it produces an extreme amount of heat. So you have to look at upgrading things like the radiator for the coolant in the motor and the intercooler, which provides cooler air to the turbo and keeps the turbo cool. And then you have to look into getting better quality antifreeze coolant and oils for your car to help keep everything cool. And you have to remember that the turbo also runs off of what cools the engine. So it runs off the same oil the same antifreeze and coolant. So when you upgrade the cooling system for the engine, you're also doing it for the turbo, because the turbo produces an extreme amount of heat, and if not maintained properly, will fail in a relatively short amount of time. You just have to remember, modding can be fun, and for me, I love doing it. I love working on cars, but you have to make sure that you do everything right. You have to make sure you get a proper tune. You have to make sure you get the proper airflow and fuel mixture for your car to run right. Make sure you get good quality internal parts if you're looking to go for big power, and make sure that everything gets cooled properly. If everything's done right, you have a car that runs great and has plenty of power. But the littlest mistakes can cause very devastating results. So do your research and make sure that you're getting the right things. Talk to your tuner, make sure you get advice from them on where to go, and as long as everything's done right, you should have a nice fun car.